you that you didn't leave us empty-handed to try and figure this whole thing out on our own, but that you've given us such clear guidance as to the kind of people that you've asked us to be, and that you've let us know what it is we're waiting for. We thank you, Lord. Amen. So here we are in Genesis chapter 6. As we look through Genesis chapter 6, there are some real key things to look for. And really, if you boil all those things down, it comes into a contrast between Noah and the rest of the world. And what you're going to discover in Genesis chapter 6 is that God sees, that he sees. And that is incredibly encouraging, as you'll see, particularly when we get into chapters 7, 8, and 9. I want to start our march through Genesis chapter 6 by actually going to Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the rivers rose, and the winds blew and pounded that house, yet it didn't collapse because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew, and they pounded that house, and it collapsed. It collapsed with a great crash. The contrast there is clear. All the people heard the words. Some of them chose to act on them. The contrast is very clear. You all know that I have a dog named Timothy. Timothy is he 11 months old now? I think he's 11 months old now. Pushing that. You might know that that's about the roughest time for a dog. That they are, I mean, that's like late teenagerhood. They think they've decided the right thing, and you got to keep guiding them and hoping that they get through it to become a good dog on the other end. My dog Timothy struggles with coming when called. I let him outside. He goes outside. He plays around. He smells things. He sees the neighbors. He barks at them. Whatever he wants to do. And I say, Timothy, come here. And I know he hears me. I know he hears me because I see his ears twitch back. I know he hears me because sometimes he turns and stares right at me. But he's not ready to come in yet. I know that he knows what he's supposed to do. And I know that he knows what he's supposed to do because this morning I grabbed a cup of yogurt out of the fridge and I ate the yogurt and I said, Timothy, come here. And he came running because one of his favorite things is to lick out that yogurt cup. I mean, he's got to have that. So I know that he knows what it means when I say, Timothy, come here. He's just choosing not to. Sometimes he hears and he puts it into practice. He acts on it. Sometimes he hears and he doesn't. And honestly, we're the exact same way. Sometimes we hear and we put into practice what we know is true. Sometimes we hear and we don't. The other day I was driving a car. It wasn't my car, but I won't tell you whose it was because she lives in my house. And the gas gauge was on E. And I said, we should put some gas in your car. And she said, no, it's fine. I'll do it tomorrow. She heard the warning, but decided not to put it into practice. Don't worry, we'll put gas in her car later. It's something that I think we develop as toddlers, quite frankly. I've spent way too much time with toddlers. And one of the phrases that I hear from toddlers often is, you're not the boss of me. And I say, well, who is the boss of you? And they say, well, that's mommy. And so I say, how do you feel about that? And mommy delegates the responsibility. And they still don't listen because I'm not the boss of them. Which tells me that mama must not be the boss of them either. You know who the boss of them is? They are. They are the boss of them. And so we have this phrase, well, you must shape the will without breaking the spirit. I disagree. Sometimes their little spirits need to be broken because their spirits are rude and rebellious and defiant and completely narcissistic. And their little spirits need to be broken. I came across this in Jeremiah chapter 17. This is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. That person will be like a bush in the wastelands. They will not see prosperity when it comes. They will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. Well, that one will be like a tree planted by a water that sends out its roots by the stream and does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green, and it has no worries of a year of drought, and it never fails to bear fruit. You see, the Lord says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind to reward each person according to their conduct and according to what their deeds deserve. The Lord paints a picture of a contrast between someone who is narcissistic and rude and says, you're not the boss of me. I'm going to keep doing what I want even though I've heard you. And one who hears what the Lord says and says, okay, I better respond to that wholeheartedly. And that's what we see here in Genesis chapter 6. Now, we worked through some of Genesis chapter 6 last week, but we really didn't take it chapter by chapter, verse by verse. It was really kind of an introduction into this section, and we really answered two questions. One question that we asked and answered is, should we take this literally? Is this story an allegory? Is it a collection of thoughts? Is it just another Bible story illustrating something? Or is this literal and should we take it as history? And I've determined that I'm going to take it literally as history. And I gave you some reasons last week that I think are good reasons. But the best reason of all is because clearly Jesus expected it to be literal. When he discussed it as literal history. And he was there. So I think he would know. The other question that we asked and answered last week is, what was the world like at this time? Because Jesus said in Matthew 24 that just as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days when he comes back a second time to redeem and remove his church physically from this earth and to bring judgment. So it'd be a good thing to know. What was the world like in those days? And we discovered a couple things. We discovered right off the bat that there was a population explosion in verse 1. When mankind began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them. We looked at that concept. And we realized that it's similar to today. We looked at verses 2 and 4 where it says, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were beautiful, and they took any as they chose for women for themselves. And we discovered, based on what we read there and what we determined there, that this was a time of rampant sexual perversion. And as we looked at verse 4, and we see that the Nephilim were on earth in those days and afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of man who bore children for them, they were the powerful men of old, the famous men, that this rampant sexual perversion was celebrated, that the result of that was thought to be the famous people. And we thought about it and realized that we're not too far from that concept even today. We looked at verse 5. When the Lord saw that human wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every inclination of the human mind was nothing but evil all the time. And we discussed what some of those terms mean. The idea of being rotten or corrupt, that's going to come up again tonight. And we realized that that is the way that it is even today. I actually came across a statistic today that listen, I study this stuff for a living, right? And I was amazed in a bad way. I had always suspicioned, we talked about last week how entertainment is the largest industry in the United States and the number one export of the United States, right? And we talked last week about how Hollywood or the movie industry generated nearly $9 billion in sales last year. That's just ticket sales. That's not all the reciprocating sales. And $9 billion, and we compared that to some other industries. I came across the quote from 2024 of a statistic of the porn industry. And the interesting thing about the porn industry is you can't really track it because so much of what happens in the porn industry is illegal or just flies under the radar or is just flat not reported. What is reported of the porn industry, remember, Hollywood movies, $9 billion in revenue. What is reported of the porn industry is $17 billion in revenue, but get this. It is estimated by the people in the government who track these things that the porn industry actually generated $97 billion in 2024 alone. Wow. Every inclination of the human mind, every imagination of the human mind was only evil all the time. Wow. And then we read in verse 11 that the earth was corrupt. That word again, we're going to come across that here in just a little bit and discuss it one more time. And that the earth was filled with wickedness, which is the word Hamas. Rotting where we stand and filled with violence. We discussed that last time. And aren't you encouraged? The world looks today like it did in the time of Noah. Yeah, real encouraging. There's actually a fifth reason, and I left it off last week, and it's what we're really going to pick up on tonight. As it was in the days of Noah, for 120 years, Noah was a herald of righteousness. We actually read that in 2 Peter chapter 2. It says, if God didn't spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on it and on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher, or it literally means a herald of righteousness, and 7 others, a herald of righteousness. Noah was telling people, there's judgment coming, get right with God, get on the ark for 120 years. And people were not responding. Interesting. People say, how in the world was Noah a preacher or a herald for 120 years? I thought he was building this big box the whole time. How did he have time to travel all around the world and tell everybody? Well, he didn't have time to do that, and he didn't need to have time to do that. You ever had a neighbor who built something weird in his backyard? It caught your attention, and he didn't even tell you about it. Have you heard of Justo? Actually, it's Justo Gallo Martinez. He built a chapel in Madrid, Spain. Have you heard of this guy? He was born in 1925, and he started building this chapel when he was about 30 years old. He wanted to be a monk, and he joined a monastery. He wanted to give his life away to God in that way, and of course he came from a Roman Catholic tradition. The other monks in the monastery didn't like him because he didn't stop working, and he didn't stop praying. He just kept at it, and they didn't like him. And so he developed tuberculosis and had to go to the hospital. And when he was released from the hospital and came back, they wouldn't let him back in. But he really wanted to do something for his God. He came from a wealthy family who owned a bunch of property in Madrid, Spain. And so he took some of that property, sold off some of the other, and he started building a chapel there. And it turned into a great cathedral. This guy never built anything in his life, but since then, architects and construction people have looked at it and are just amazed with the way that he did this. You've probably heard about it. It's a worldwide phenomenon. This guy did it by himself. This amazing cathedral. He passed away in 2021, and they've had to determine what to do with this amazing cathedral, whether or not the Roman Catholic Church will take it over or what they'll do with it. I won't answer that. You can look it up and read about it. I'd love to go see it. People from around the world were coming to see Don Justo, they called him, as he was building this. Even when he got into his 90s and was out there hauling tile and concrete, people were coming from around the world to see Don Justo. And there's some great stories. His favorite book was The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis. People called it his second Bible. If you haven't read that, I recommend it. So a lot of it is about being a humble person, not thinking too highly of yourself. There's a great story of a young lady who had just finished her graduate degree in art and architecture. And she was traveling around the world looking at these things. And she came and visited Don Justo and saw his place and all that he was doing. And she told him about herself, about how she had gone and gotten these degrees and paid her way through college, and about how she'd gotten good grades and the projects that she'd worked on and how she'd traveled around the world working on these art and architecture projects. Now she'd been to all these places and seen all these people and seen all these great buildings and all these things that she'd done, and then her plans, what she was going to do next with all this information, and she just kept going. And Don Justo just interrupted her. And he said, "You say the word I a lot." And that's the only thing he said to her. And she was ashamed and embarrassed and deeply considered who she was from that moment on. Amazing stuff. He pointed, you can say what you want about building a cathedral or his motivation or whatever you want. He pointed a lot of people to God. And he never set out to be a preacher. He wanted to be a quiet, hermetic monk. But he built something amazing and everybody heard, and that's the story of Noah. He built something amazing and everybody heard. I have something I'd like to say, and sometimes I wonder if I shouldn't not say it, and so that probably means I shouldn't, but I really want you to think about this for a moment. Do you suppose that Noah was a liberal theologian or a conservative theologian? You know what a theologian is, right? A theologian is someone who thinks about God. I guess that makes us all theologians. We all think about God. Now, a conservative theologian would be somebody who hears the word of the Lord and takes it for exactly what it is. Literally, what it says, that's what he means. A liberal theologian is one who says, well, I hear what you're saying, but I need to apply that a little differently. I need to massage that in certain ways to make it fit how I think it should fit. You know, Lord, I hear what you said literally, but I think maybe what you mean is something else. Do you suppose Noah was a conservative theologian or a liberal theologian? I think he was probably a conservative theologian. Because the Lord said, build a big box, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high, make it out of gopher wood, cover it in pitch inside and out, get you, your wife, your sons, their wives, and a whole bunch of animals. I'm going to send you onto that thing, and I'm going to shut the door, and it's going to rain, and 371 days later, I'm going to let you out into a new world. And Noah said, I have no idea what you mean, Lord, but I'm going to do exactly what you said. I like J. Vernon McGee. I don't always agree with everything he says, but he said it's okay, I can be wrong. I like J. Vernon McGee. I like to listen to him on the radio. I have commentaries by J. Vernon McGee if they'll ever show up. And one of the things that J. Vernon McGee says that I so appreciate, nobody ever became a liberal by reading the Bible. And he doesn't mean a liberal politician. He means a liberal theologian. Nobody ever decided what they want to decide about God and the things of the Word by reading the Bible. So do like Noah and get in the Word. Now, let's dig into the difference between Noah and the world, and we see it right off the bat in verse 8, and that's where we're going to pick up. Noah, however, found grace with God. Unmerited favor. We talked about this on Sunday. If you missed that, look it up on YouTube and catch the Sunday sermon from this last Sunday. We talked a lot about what grace is, the unmerited favor of God. That is, God has chosen to lavish His love and blessing on us, not because of something that we have done, but because of the choice that He has made. Noah found favor. Why do you suppose, out of all of the people on the earth, Noah was the one who found favor? Well, the writer of Hebrews tells us. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke of his offerings, and by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he's dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. Before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleases God, and without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. Stop for just a moment. We talked about this concept of belief last week. Do you remember what that is? Or last Sunday, we talked about belief. Belief is not wearing a parachute. Belief is stepping off of the airplane. By faith, Noah, Hebrews 11:7, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By faith, he condemned the world and became the heir of righteousness that is in keeping with faith. Why was Noah righteous? Was it because he never missed Sunday church? And he tithed 26% of his income. And every time he saw a homeless guy with a sign, he gave him something. Is that why Noah was righteous? Was Noah righteous because he always wore white buck shoes and a tie? No. Noah was righteous because he believed. Because he heard what God said and he responded to it. He acted on it. He didn't decide what it meant. He took God at his word. He didn't say, I hear what you're saying, Lord, about rain, but I really don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it's never happened before, so you must mean something else. You know, something that better fits what I already think. No, he heard what God said, he took him at his word, and he acted on it. James says, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food, and one of you says to him, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs. What good is it to that person? In the same way, faith itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. In other words, wearing the parachute but not jumping off the plane, you haven't accomplished a thing. Some will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Well, show me your faith without deeds, and I'll show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there's one God? Good. Even the demons believe and shudder. Noah believed what God had said, and he acted on it. Man, I got to tell you guys, you're going to see as we look at Noah that it is remarkably easy to please God. People think it's so hard. I had a great conversation with a guy earlier this week that grew up in a very legalistic kind of church environment. And he talked to me about that and how hard that was and kind of what he's had to learn to overcome. And he's seen some of that legalism creep into the Church of the Nazarene as a whole from time to time, and how that's bothered him and what he's done about it and that kind of thing. And I can understand because we begin to decide what it takes to please God. We begin to decide that somebody with long dreadlock hairdo, well, that's just not pleasing. Or somebody who plays video games all night long, well, that's just not pleasing. Or whatever we feel like choosing. Whatever they eat or drink, or if they're too heavy or too skinny, or their jeans are too tight, or their clothes are too baggy, or whatever. And they're going to have to change that. Well, who is it that we really want them to please? Do we want them to please God, or do we want them to please us? And who decided that we were the boss of them? It is remarkably easy to please God. Remarkably easy. Well, you've got to join the right church. You've got to be in membership. You have to go at least 3 Sundays out of 4. Not the church down the street, my church. No. It is remarkably easy. What he says, we hear, we absorb, and we act on. That's it. The more that I study the Bible, the more I realize he just wants us to take him at his word. I'm telling you, just between you and me, if you should choose to do that, to listen to what he says, to absorb it, let it become part of you, and act on it, live your life by it, you'll be completely transformed. You will not be the same person that started that journey. You're going to come out on the other end, somebody else. And I can tell you from personal experience, you're going to like the person you're becoming a lot more than the person you used to be. And so will your spouse. But that's all there is. That's all there is. Let's look at Noah here real quick. Verse 9. These are the family records of Noah, or if you have a more literal translation, these are the generations of Noah. This is what we're going to know, what we're going to learn about Noah, is what the author is telling us. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries, and Noah walked with God. Also, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. That's pretty much all we know about Noah in here. Some people think, well, Noah must have been, a really good carpenter. Actually, no. Later, we're going to learn that Noah was a farmer. That's the only other thing that we learn about Noah. The only other thing we learn about Noah. Noah was a farmer. We find out incidentally by accident. But the things we want, that the writer of this document, which was Noah to begin with, as he passed the story to Shem, who passed it to his child, who passed it to his child. 3 things we want to know about Noah. He was a righteous man. He was blameless among his contemporaries. And he walked with God. Righteous, what does that mean? It means just or correct or lawful or right. When Abraham was arguing with God about Lot in Sodom, he said, what if you find 10 righteous people? Will you sweep the righteous away with the wicked? That's the opposite, right? Deuteronomy 4:8. What a great nation has these righteous statutes that I set before you today, the Torah, the law of God. Nehemiah 3, Nehemiah is praying to God about all the disaster that had come on his people. He says, God, you are righteous, just, lawful, correct concerning what has happened to us. It's a key concept in the Psalms and in Proverbs and in Ecclesiastes and in Job and in all the wisdom literature of the Hebrews. Righteousness. What is righteousness? What do you have to do to be correct, lawful, and just? I'll give you a hint you already know. Do you remember that Abraham was considered righteous? Abraham, the guy who had 2 wives, who mistreated one of them. Abraham, the guy who lied to the government about one of his wives. Abraham was considered righteous. Do you remember why? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Wow, he wasn't perfect. He was as much of a goof up as any of us. But because he believed God, he listened to what God said, he absorbed it, and he followed, he did what God said. Even if it meant changing his life, even if it meant moving to a faraway country, he heard what God said, and he did what God said. He made mistakes along the way that God had to fix for him because he messed things up from time to time. And God had to swoop in and take care of it every time. But he was considered righteous. Noah can call himself righteous. Oh, Noah's not perfect. We'll read about that later. He was a goof up too. But he was considered righteous among all the people of his day because he listened to God and did what he said. Next thing, he was he was righteous, and then he was blameless among his contemporaries. That word blameless is the word tamim in Hebrew. It's a huge concept. We would translate it perhaps integrity. It means having a moral character that's complete, whole, entire, and sound. It is the same word that can be applied in a lot of different ways. One of the ways was to pottery. If you build a pot, and in the process of getting that pot ready to sell, it would crack. You could glue that together and still sell it. But that pot is not tamim. It's not whole. It's not right. It's got a problem in it like that. It's not completely healthy or wholesome or unimpaired. That's where this concept comes from. And it's really easy to understand this Hebrew concept of tamim. And it simply means being the same person all the time as long as that person is righteous. So you act a certain way with a certain group of people. You act like a person who hears what God said, absorbs it, and acts upon it. You act like that in front of your church friends and your work buddies and your family at home. Tamim. Think about Job. He sat there in dust and ashes. His friends gathered around him and said, Job, clearly you must have done something wrong. We've never seen it, but you must have done something wrong. And Job said, no, I am tamim. The person that you see at the marketplace is the same person that you see at work, is the same person that you see at home, is the same person when I'm completely by myself and there's nobody looking over my shoulder. Tamim. Wow, that's a high standard. Honestly, I pound this into the heads of the young men that I mentor in youth group, this concept of being tamim. And I got to be honest with you, none of us can measure up. So it's a darn good thing that in God's eyes we're considered righteous. Because we might goof up as we go. But every time we do goof up, we hear what the Lord has to say about that. We absorb it into our lives, and we act upon it. Oh, you know what frustrates me about me? You know what frustrates me about me? I've been studying and teaching this a long time. I'm not saying this as though you should follow or I think it's a brag, but I remember when I very first got my very first King James Bible from my grandparents, I started reading that thing and I loved it. I remember being a kid in bed at the end of the day and reading one more chapter. I don't know what it was about it. I just really enjoyed it. And even when I've been at my lowest points in my spiritual walk, I've still enjoyed it. I've been reading this thing pretty much my whole life. And I've learned a lot from it. And I know what's right. And I know what's wrong. And I know what I'm supposed to do and what attitude I'm supposed to have. And where I should go and what I should see and what I should avoid and what I should do and what I should say. I know what's right. And when I'm choosing to do something wrong, I know better every time. And oh, that frustrates me. And I say something snarky to Wendy. I'm like, oh, I know I shouldn't. I know I'm not Tamim. But since I know, now here's the thing. Since I know, I can do something about it. You know what frustrates me even more than that frustrates me about me? Is when I see myself or another person. Oh, Tom, you've had these conversations. I've had so many conversations. Do you see what you're doing is destructive? Uh-huh. Do you see the effect that this is having on your family? Uh-huh. Can you look down the road and see where you're going to be in your life if you continue with this? Uh-huh. But I'm going to keep on doing it. Oh. Noah was not like that. As he grew in his relationship with God, when he came across something in his relationship that was not accurate, that didn't match up with the Word of God, he said, you know what, I got to change this. I've heard the Word, I'm absorbing the Word, now I'm going to act on it. The cool thing about God is He never looks in your rearview mirror. Don't you hate that when you're driving down the road? Somebody else is looking, oh, there's a guy behind you who's tailgating you. How about you leave that to me? I got this covered. God doesn't do that. He never looks in your rearview mirror and says, yeah, but remember last Wednesday? He only looks ahead in your life. You go to Him and say, oh, remember how I wasn't Tamim? I wasn't behaving in integrity. He says, no. I just see how you have a chance to do it right now. Oh, that's good. That's good. Noah was Tamim. He was blameless. He had integrity. And Noah walked with God. Oof. Ooh, I like this one. Noah walked with God. This concept of walking in Hebrew is a concept of how you live your life. And you're going to see that a lot with people. As we go through the Old Testament, you're going to see a lot of people, well, he walked this way, he walked that way. He walked with the righteous, he walked with the wicked. That means the style of life they choose to live. Noah chose a style of life that was with God all the time. Psalm 1 that I shared with you earlier, one of my very favorites. Blessed is the one who doesn't walk with the wicked, or stand with the sinner, or sit with the scoffer. Psalm 23, a beautiful psalm of the shepherd walking with the sheep through life. My favorite Proverbs, he who walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. Who lives his life this way. Noah lived his life this way with God. Now, let me tell you something cool about God. There's this great story in 2 Chronicles 19. King Asa is the king. King Asa started his life following the statutes of God. The army of Cush and Libya combined together and came to invade Israel, and they were huge and doing some massive damage. And so Asa went to God and said, please help us. We don't know what to do, so our eyes look to you. One of my favorite verses. And God came and rescued them. But then later in his life, the army of Aram came upon him, smaller army. And rather than looking to God, he hired a mercenary army to come and help. And the prophet came and said, Asa, you're doing wrong. And Asa said, you're not the boss of me. And the prophet said, the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth. Why? To judge you for being wrong? No. To strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed. Asa, commit yourself to God. I know that this threatening army is disastrous, and I know this is keeping you up at night, and I know you're really worried about this, and I know you're looking for solutions. Let me tell you the solution. Turn your heart fully to Him. Turn your heart fully to Him, because then He will strengthen you. Wow. So here's Noah, whose heart is fully to God. And he comes and he says, Noah, a disastrous thing is going to happen. Do you think maybe Noah was afraid? Oh, I think so. Do you think maybe Noah was confused? Oh, definitely. Do you think, oh gosh, we've heard this story so many times. Imagine being Noah and hearing it for the first time. What are you talking about, God? What's an ark anyway? What's rain? Where are these animals coming? What are you talking about? Well, listen. The eyes of the Lord are roaming throughout the earth. Oh, not looking for people who are failing. The eyes of the Lord are roaming throughout the earth, not looking to condemn those who should be condemned. The eyes of the Lord are roaming throughout the earth to find those whose hearts are fully committed to Him so that He can strengthen them. Oh, that's great. Noah walked with God. He went for a walk one day. God explained this to Noah. He said, oof, God, not only do I not understand what you're telling me, I'm frightened by what you say. Rochelle and I were talking earlier. We were about the same age. We grew up in the same generation. We grew up in the pre-Left Behind series generation, when they would just randomly show up in Sunday school and say, I want you to know that there's coming a day when they're going to chop your head off for being a Christian. Or you better know Jesus, or your mommy and daddy will be taken to heaven and you'll be left sitting here all by yourself, left behind, not knowing what to do. It scared us to death. Oh, Wendy and I have had conversations about being a little kid, not being able to sleep. I mean, I appreciate what they were trying to do with Gen X, but it didn't work. All it did was scared us. God says, listen, if your heart is fully committed to me, you might get scared. What's coming might be scary, but I'm going to strengthen your heart so that you can endure it, so that you can thrive in the midst of it. And that's what we see Noah. Righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries, and he walked with God. Can you see that it's just not that hard? Oh, listen, the life change. Oh man, transformation can hurt. But walking with God, you just take Him at His word. Just do what He says. Oh, but I don't know everything that He said. Me neither, but I know some of what He said, and I'll just do what He said about that. That's right. And then, verse 10, Noah fathered 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. I was really going to get through 6 tonight. We'll see if I can pull it off. We're going to learn about those 3 guys later. The one thing I want you to notice about those 3 guys is that Shem comes first. That means he is the legal firstborn. That's going to matter big time later in this book. I don't know if he was the actual physical firstborn or not, but he is the legal firstborn. And we discussed, a couple weeks ago, that concept. That means he inherits the blessing of God that had been handed down to Noah, and he inherits all of the stories. And that's going to matter later. Okay, we'll come back. We'll skip those guys and come back to them later. Verse 11. This is so interesting. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with wickedness. Okay, we already discussed those words, right? Corrupt, rotting as it stands, and wickedness, violence. That's a chosen, arrogant, and particularly evil violence. So the earth is rotting where it stands and filled with Hamas. Verse 12, God saw how corrupt the earth was, for every creature had corrupted its way on earth. God saw that it was rotting where it stands. Here's what I want you to understand. This doesn't say God saw how disobedient the creatures of the earth were, and He was mad about that. Or God saw how nobody else was listening and it upset him. What God saw was that the earth was rotting. And by the earth, he doesn't mean necessarily the land, although there's a factor involved there. Because when humans misbehave, they destroy their environment. You understand that, right? I don't need to spend time on that. When we misbehave, our environment gets destroyed. Now, that doesn't mean that every environmental disaster that you see is a result of misbehavior. Sometimes it just happens. Like wildfires. Sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it's an environmental disaster where we were really trying to do the right thing, but we goofed and the wrong thing happened. It happens. Those are the exceptions to the rule. The essential rule is when humans misbehave, they ruin their planet. Man, sin is just the most incredible thing. It's just. Have you ever been working with like caulking in a bathroom, like caulking a bathtub or caulking some tile? That stuff gets everywhere. It just you can't. You got the gloves. You're trying so hard. It's on your elbow. It's on your ear. You're cleaning everything up. Oh, there's some on the floor over here. There's some on the wall. There's some out in the hall. I didn't even go out in the hall. And you know what I mean? That's like sin. It gets everywhere. It affects everything. You think, well, I'm gonna go ahead and make this decision to do this bad thing because it'll please me. But listen, it won't affect anybody else. I'm all by myself on the business trip. Nobody's around. Nobody will ever know. Nobody will be affected. Yes, they will. It'll affect your family back home. It'll affect future generations. It'll affect people you've never met. An incredible thing. God looked and saw that the creatures of the earth were rotting. Started with the humans, spread to the animals, and the earth itself was rotting alive. I have known people who had physical conditions that ended in amputation of a body part because they developed a rotting in their flesh. And they talk about how tremendously painful it is. And as much as it's a psychological and, quite frankly, life transformative issue to have a leg amputated or an arm or even just a foot, compared to rotting, it's worth it. They'll take it. This is what the earth saw, or this is what God saw of the earth, is that it was rotting. So, verse 13, God said to Noah, now this is what the CSB says, I have decided to put an end to every creature, for the earth is filled with wickedness because of them. Therefore, I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. Now, I study out of the CSB for a reason, and it's not necessarily because it's the most accurate. I study out of the CSB, actually there's two reasons. One thing, I work really well with the rhythms. My language and the language here, the way I talk and the way that I read, it works really well together. And I strongly suggest that you find a Bible that you can read like that, all right? That you can just read and absorb that makes sense to you. So if you're reading the King James because, well, that's the one the Apostle Paul used, but it doesn't make any sense to you, then don't read that one. If you're reading the ESV because the radio preacher you really like uses the ESV, that's fine. But if you've got to struggle to understand what's going on, if you've got to really think about, I'm not talking about what the text, I'm not talking about thinking about what it's communicating. I'm saying it's really hard to read. Well, then don't read that one. Find something else. There's a lot of them. There's one particular author, he's a pastor that I like. He's a smart guy. He's got like letters after his name, He's a smart guy. And he's a good pastor and a popular pastor, and he's written some books that have been life-changing for a lot of people. Really like what he writes. He reads the New Living Translation. I personally don't read the New Living Translation. It's too, I don't know, can I say gumball for me? It's just, I want something, But for him, it just works for him. I have one friend that's a retired pastor now, and he would read the Revised Standard, but when he was young, his wife and children died in a car accident. And he said he couldn't read the Revised Standard during that time. He picked up the NIV, which he greatly disliked the translation style. But the rhythm of the text worked for him. Listen, find something that you can connect with, all right? You got to understand, every translation is an interpretation. The people who translated those words, there's not like a word-for-word equivalent. They read what it said and they interpreted it into English. It went through their mind, and their mind is not your mind. And so it's not always going to be how you would have translated it. And their mind is most certainly not the mind of the person who wrote it. So it's not going to be necessarily exactly what you want. The second thing I really like about the CSB is exactly that. It really makes me think, particularly with the Hebrew. I'm continually going back when I read a verse. You might not like the CSB for that. That's fine. Pick one that you do. I'm continuously reading a verse and saying, is that really what it says? And going back and digging in. And this is one of them. Verse 13. This is absolutely not how I would have translated verse 13, but then they didn't ask me. More literally, this is what it says. The end of all flesh is in front of my face, because the earth is filled with destructive, purposeful violence. Hamas. The end of all flesh is in front of my face. Therefore, as a result of that, I am going to destroy them, that would revert back to the flesh, with the earth. And here's where it gets really interesting. The word destroy is the word sakath. The word sakath is that word for corrupt, rotting. So the Lord looks at the earth. He looks at the condition of the actual earth. He looks at the cause for the condition, and it's the flesh. He looks at the flesh and sees that the flesh is rotting alive. And he says, I'm going to finish the process. Rotting takes time. I'm going to finish it now. People say God is a mean, genocidal, arrogant being who just decides that he doesn't like this group anymore because they displease him, and so he's going to end them. Nope. Now, in the Babylonian account of this, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is hilarious, and I recommend reading it because it's pure comedy, that's what happened. One of the gods was angry at mankind because that god was trying to take a nap, and mankind was making too much noise. And he finally lost his temper and said, I've had enough, and flooded the earth. That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is that God is seeing the condition of mankind, and he's rotting alive. He's living in a continual condition of pain, and God says, I'm going to deal with that. Just like one of the hardest things, I think, for us to do. Have you ever had to put down a dog? We talked about this on Sunday. Man, that's hard to do. But it's also sometimes the most gracious thing that you can do. That's what's going on here. But as God looked at all of the earth and saw the condition of it, he looked at Noah, and he saw that Noah was not rotting alive because Noah believed. So, God says, verse 14, make yourself an ark. We talked about what that is. We talked a little bit about that on Sunday. You'll want to catch that again. It just means great big box. A great big box that's built for a specific purpose. A rectangular box that holds important things. That's what an ark is. Listen, it's not a boat, okay? It's just not. The Ark Encounter in Kentucky, I think, is fantabulous. But it's not a boat. It's not a boat. It was a great big box. More like a barge, quite frankly. There's no propulsion, no steering, no keel to keep it straight. It's just a great big barge. It is the exact same word they use for Ark of the Covenant. A rectangular box that holds important things. Exactly. Yep. So, make yourself one, a great big one. Now, Noah had no idea what he was doing. I am fully convinced. We mentioned later that Noah is a farmer. The text tells us that Noah is a farmer. So we find that out later. He didn't know how to build a barge. He's not a ship builder or even an ark builder. So God tells him, here's the dimensions that you need to use. And the dimensions are roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet tall. Here's the really interesting thing about those dimensions. That ratio set that's developed in there is the same ratio set that we use to build naval vessels today. It's such a good ratio set. Matter of fact, one particular ship, did I write down the name of it? Oh, I hope I did. I don't know if I did or not. USS New Mexico is a destroyer that matches that almost exactly in our U.S. naval fleet. And there are other ships, and it's not just the U.S. Navy. This is like a really common ratio. It works. Noah didn't understand hydrodynamics, but God does. So he said, build this, it's going to work. Build it with 3 decks, build it with 1 door. And he says this really interesting term. Make yourself this box, make it out of gopher wood. We talked about that on Sunday. This was more of a process of certain type of a certain genre of wood than a species. We talked about that on Sunday. And then it says make rooms in the ark. That word rooms is literally nests. Make nests in the ark. And this is how you're to make it. 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. You are to make a roof, finishing the sides of the ark to with 18 inches of the roof. You are to put a door in the sides of the ark, make it with lower, middle, and upper decks. And then he says, let me skip down to verse 19 here for a moment. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all the living creatures, male and female, and keep them alive with you. 2 of everything from birds according to their kind, livestock according to their kinds, and animals that crawl on the ground according to their kinds. They will come to you so that you can keep them alive. Now, there are some people who say that is absolutely impossible. When we look at the quantity of species on the earth today and realize that many species have gone extinct, that there is no way that Noah could have fit them all onto the ark. Well, let's take a little bit closer look at the ark and a little bit closer look at what Noah is being commanded to do with the animals. To put it in modern terms, the ark is roughly 7 large parking spaces wide. So picture that. Not those dinky little ones that you can't fit your pickup truck in, but real parking spaces. It is like 3 modern commercial stories tall. So not like just at your house, but like a commercial building. 3 modern stories tall. It is about 4.5 football fields long. That's pretty big. It has 100,000 square feet of deck space and 1.4 million cubic feet of storage space. That's a lot. You know those U-Haul trucks you can get for like an in-town move? They're like a 2-bedroom in-town move. The box is about 20 feet long. Can you picture one of those? That's about 1,000 cubic feet. Okay? The ark was 1.4 million cubic feet. That's essentially the cubic feet that you would find in 522 normal-sized train cars. The kinds of train cars that would haul livestock on 2 decks. On one of those 2-deck train cars, you can fit 240 sheep comfortably. Okay? We got 522 of them. Now, sheep is important because sheep is the average-sized mammal. If you take all the different sizes of mammals, everything up from the biggest elephant, don't worry about the whales, they could handle the water. The biggest elephant down to the smallest one of those little wolves or squirrels or whatever, the average mammal size is a sheep. On that ark, you could fit 125,000 sheep comfortably. People say, oh, but there's still so many more species than that. You got to understand, Noah was not told to take the species. There's a word here that's used, and the word is kinds. Noah did not take a black bear, a brown bear, polar bear, an Asian sun bear, and whatever other bear you're thinking of. Noah took a pair of bears. He might have taken 2 pair of bears. God might have sent maybe a polar bear because he's white and a black bear because he's black. I don't know. but kinds indicates genre of animals that can breed together. He didn't take all the various types of bovine. He took one type of bovine. And he didn't take a Jersey cow and a Highland cow and an American dairy cow. He just took a bovine. And one of the things that we have learned is that with the right genetic mix, you can make all of these. You can make all of these kinds, or all of these species with the right genetic mix. I mean, we know that dogs, all of our household dogs, have descended down from one of two types of animals which are related, a wolf or a fox. All of these different ones. I got a Great Dane who's roughly the size of a small horse, and you might have a Pekingese. And they came from the same kinds. Here's another thought. Oh gosh, there's a really good book called The Genesis Flood by Whitcomb and Morris from 1961. And by the way, I bought myself another copy because I don't know if mine's ever going to show up. So warning there, it's going to show up in the mail. But anyway, it was on sale. Anyway, it's a fantastic book. I so highly recommend The Genesis Flood by Whitcomb and Morris. These are two guys who are scientists in a variety of fields who took a really honest scientific look at what the Bible says about the Genesis flood, and then cross-referenced it against the modern geology and that kind of thing. I've referenced that book 2 or 3 times already. I recommend you get it. Anyway, man, they have some fantastic things to say. And one of the things they suggest, but we don't know for sure, but they suggest would have made sense is if these animals were juvenile animals. Because juvenile animals take up less room, they don't eat as much, and juvenile animals aren't as territorial. They can mix easier. Somebody says, well, yeah, but lions eat lambs. Even baby lions eat baby lambs. How are we going to deal with that? No, they haven't always. The fossil record tells us that there was a time when animals were most likely all vegetarian. And you know what the Bible says? When the world is restored, when everything is created new, when we're living in the brand new perfect world, the lion will eat grass like the ox and lay down with the lamb. We're actually, spoiler alert, skip ahead a couple chapters, and God's going to talk about that. It's pretty easy to make the jump, very short, assumptive jump, that this would have worked. According to Whitcomb and Morris, it would have required 17,600 species of mammals. 17,600 species of mammals to make this work. Double that, you got about 36,000 animals. How many can we fit? 125,000. We got room. We got room for the birds. We got room for the lizards. Oh, and by the way, dinosaurs. What do we do about the dinosaurs? Well, some of them got wiped out by the flood. Sorry to say. Some of them are gone. Some of them lived past the flood. We know that because we got fossils. But then most of those were wiped out by man because, we just hunt things to extinction from time to time. Some of them are still around. I don't know if you've ever seen an alligator or a crocodile. I mean, they're still around in some form or another. Well, how did he get one of them great big dinosaurs on the ark? Well, Whitcomb and Morris suppose, what if he just brought the egg? Wouldn't that be enough? Yeah, that'd be enough. There's room. I won't read you all of the text I have highlighted here because Wendy won't let me. But essentially that's what it is. Now, oh, how I want to get into some things, but I'm told that I'm out of time. I just want you to know, you know what, we'll pick it back up at verse 17 next time. The concept of the covenant is so important, and I don't want to rush that. But I do want you to skip down just a second to verse 22. Just skip down to verse 22 with me. Now, we haven't talked about all that Noah was commanded to do yet. We have talked about how he was going to build this huge box, make it with 3 decks, and a gap all around the top. Oh, we're going to talk about the window on Sunday. Oh, don't miss Sunday. The window is my favorite thing. We're going to talk about that. We talk about how there's one door, right? We talk about how the animals are going to come to him. Oh, there's one thing we should cover, and that's the big contradiction. You see, later he is told to bring, we're going to leave that a cliffhanger for next week. Later he's told to bring extra animals. Wait, he's told to bring 2 by 2 and extra? Yeah, we'll talk about that next week. It's pretty easy to understand if you're not a Western English speaker. It's pretty easy to understand. Anyway, he is told to gather food for these guys. What did they eat? Grains, grass. You guys ever been haying? Man, that's a job. And he's got to do that for 38,000 or so mammals, plus lizards and birds. He was a busy guy. And look at verse 22. I love this. You ready for this? You know how you go down, you guys don't have Hobby Lobby. I don't know where you guys go for this stuff. You go down and you buy a thing that you hang on the wall and it's a Bible verse, and it's all in nice calligraphy script, and you hang it on the wall, to let your neighbors know you're Christian when they come over, otherwise they wouldn't know. Verse 22, this is the one that ought to be done. And Noah did this. He did everything that God commanded him. Oh, don't you see? That's the difference between a righteous person and an unrighteous person. That's the difference between the wise and the wicked. That's the difference between the just and the man of integrity and the woman of righteousness. Noah did this. He did everything that God commanded him. Well, God ain't commanded me nothing. Grab one of these. It's pretty easy, too. He hasn't commanded you to be perfect. He hasn't commanded you to follow all the rules. He hasn't commanded you to get it right 100% of the time. He has commanded you to be a righteous man or woman, blameless, and to walk with him. And what does this require? Well, you listen to what he tells you to do. You internalize that. Let it soak in. And then you just do it. Noah believed God, just like Abraham. And it was credited to him as righteousness. And the eyes of the Lord were roaming throughout the earth to find that one that believed him, that heart that believed, so that the Lord could strengthen Noah and get him ready for what was coming. Fantastic. Oh, that I would be a man like Noah and that you would be a person like Noah as well. Let's stop and pray. Thank you, Lord, for guiding us so clearly and helping us to hear you so well. Would you speak, oh Lord, that we can listen? And would you walk hand in hand as we walk hand in hand with you? And we thank you, Lord.